Greetings, fellow humans. Now, today's project is one I've been thinking about for a little bit. I realised last summer, in the height of all heat, that I did not have enough appropriate summer clothes, and this summer, Britain saw its hottest day ever. So again, I realised I do not have enough summer-appropriate, heat-appropriate clothes, and so I decided I was going to make some out of bedsheets. Now, this duvet cover and pillowcase set had two different but matching fabrics, and I've already taken the liberty of unstitching them, seam ripping them, if you will. And I think I want to make just some really massive trousers, and maybe some culottes, and probably some matching crop tops, because one garment isn't enough, is it? But the thing is, I want them to have a kind of like cutesy 40's feel, so we're going for really huge trousers. The pattern that I'm going to be using, which I have already done some drafting for, as you may be able to see, is based on the pattern that I created for my Gentleman Jack Skellington trousers, that was based on a commercial pattern. Because the top part of the trousers already fit me really well, I thought it would be great to just make them have really wide legs. So that's where we're starting from. Some ripped apart old sheets, some rough dreams of 40's style trousers, culottes, and crop tops. Crop tops I have no idea how I am going to create or what they will look like. I haven't thought much about this, if you didn't get that impression. But as usual, we're going to give it a go, and just see where we end up. Oh, the other thing about this fabric is it is very thin and will probably be reasonably see-through, which is kind of a problem because I only own black underwear, but I think I've just decided I don't care. The world can see a bit of outline of my underwear. I wear underwear, people. Shocking, but true. Enough preamble, ramble stuff. 40's trousers, culottes, crop tops. Let's go.
I decided to start with the trousers, pinning my pattern in place on my completely unironed fabric, cutting my front and back leg pieces out, notching all the notches, and finally thread marking my dart points and my dots. Dots, just in case you don't know, are marks on a pattern that tell you where to stop or start your seams, and they usually show up in places where multiple seams are going to meet so those areas don't get too bulky, or, like the ones I'm marking here, so that the garment can be correctly constructed and sit well on the body. I also cut out two strips of the grey fabric to join together and use as my waistband. I then laid out the second fabric, folded my pattern pieces to the right length for my culottes, and followed the same cutting out, notching and thread marking process on those pieces as well. And I was ready to start sewing. First I tackled the darts on the back hip of the trousers, and then sewed the inseam of the legs, finishing those seams off and hiding all my raw edges by trimming one side of the seam allowance, folding the wide seam allowance edge I left over and under the one I just trimmed, and stitching that folded edge to secure it down.
Okay, so I thought I would explain a thing. I'm constructing these in a bit of an arse backwards way, in that I'm doing it in a funny way, not that the arse of the trousers is the correct way round. I'm just doing this in a strange order. Usually with trousers, you would sew your inner leg seam, and then your outside seams, and then you would do your crotch seam after that. But because I want to make my pockets out of a different fabric, and I want to cut it out of the same fabric for both the culottes and the trousers, and I haven't done that yet, and I'm being lazy and procrastinating it, I thought I would just do the crotch seam before I do my side seams. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm pinning up my crotch seam. We'll do that first, even though that is not usually the order you do things in. It's kind of easier to do it this way around, or it makes more sense, because generally when you make trousers, you finish each of your legs, and then you put one leg right side out inside the other leg that's inside out, and sew the crotch seam. And it's really easy to sew the wrong thing, and like just doesn't quite make sense. Trousers are tricky, and I find it easier to do them in this order, or that's what I'm going to keep telling myself. Let's finish pinning a crotch seam.
So after finishing that pinning, I sewed up the crotch and hid the raw edges on that seam as well. While all this was happening, by the way, I'd been doing the exact same steps on my culottes. I just didn't think it was worth filming and showing all of that twice.
Oh, hi there. It's a new day. And because I've gotten to the same stage on the culottes as I had on the trousers, it is now time to cut out and attach some pocket bags, do the side seams, pleat the pleats, and whip up and attach some waistbands. And then we'll basically be done with the lower body garments of this whole bedsheet 40s summer clothes projects thing. So let's get to it, shall we?
I pinned up and cut 4 pocket bags out of my supplemental fabric, which I think was originally a tablecloth. Sewed my pocket bags to my trousers and culottes. Then sewed around the pocket bag and into the side seam. And of course, finished them all off to hide my raw edges. The waistband was a little tricky because I wanted to have the front flat and the back elasticated, so I backed my front waist piece with interfacing, and I added a strip of the heavy cotton fabric I had just for extra structure. Then I pinned and stitched the back waist piece to it. Now, while I did follow pretty much identical steps on the culottes as I did on the trousers, there was one difference. On the trousers, I pleated the front waist onto the waistband, plain and simple, but I wanted there to be a little bit of a stylistic difference between them. So on the culottes, I decided to sew the pleats instead, essentially turning them into like giant pin tucks. And I pressed the folds towards the front centre of the culottes to make them nice and crispy.
Okay, so confession time. I was getting to my waistbands and had very diligently cut out my 1-inch wide elastic that I had planned to use on the back waist from the very beginning. When I realised something, I messed up my maths. For me to house my 1-inch wide elastic and have a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance on each side, I need my waistbands to be 3¼ inches wide. I cut them 2¼ inches wide. So, I have a few options. I can accept that I've wasted a bunch of fabric and recut and resew all my waistbands, or I can follow my natural instinct of rifling through my haberdashery drawer and finding some narrower elastic, which I diligently cut strips of at the right length, and having a 3/4 of an inch wide waistband and taking a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance on the waistband instead. It wasn't the plan, but I think that's what I'm gonna do. I feel quite foolish, but oh well. Thankfully, in my stash of stuff, I had elastic that is narrow enough to make this work, so we're just going to go with that and get back on attaching the waistbands to the trousers.
So with my new, narrower elastic in hand, I secured it to the seam allowance of the waistband's side seams. I pinned and sewed each waistband on, and hemmed both my trousers and my culottes.
So I'm back. What have I got to say for myself? Well, the culottes and the trousers are all but finished, so now we are on to a quandary of sorts, which is, what do I do for the shirts, for the tops, for the things I am going to wear on my upper half? I don't have any patterns for 40s style tops or shirts, and I'm not going to draft something that I would feel the need to mock up to try out for me to then just go and try and make it out of bed sheets. So what I was thinking, rifle through my patterns and pull out any patterns, any at all, that looked like it could be MacGyvered into the kind of thing I was after. I'm particularly considering the top parts of these wrap dresses. However, I don't actually know if these are legitimate wrap dresses or if it is all an illusion. So I'm going to need to pull the patterns out of the envelopes to even check. But I think that between the various types of patterns I have for various kinds of dresses, there is something I could use the top part of, or just squish together with other patterns to try and get the general 40s summer vibes I'm after. We'll see. Let's pull some patterns out of their envelopes. Right, so I've gone through my bits, and I think what I'm going to do is this. Use these big puffy sleeves from this pattern, and MacGyver that onto the top half of one of these two. This is an actual legitimate wrap dress, so I can take just the top half of it and turn it into a wrap top. And this one has a lot of that kind of drapey, gathered look to the front of it that I associate with the 40s, so I'm going to give it a go. Which one of these that big poofy sleeve is going into, I'm not sure yet, because it depends how much fabric I have and how much each of them will require. because the sleeve pattern, this poofy sleeve pattern, from here to here is the width, and you're meant to put it on a fold. I don't even know if I can get it in frame. And from here to here is the length. So, wish me luck. I might be able to get it out of the fabric I made the culottes out of. Then again, I might not.
So I cut all the pattern pieces I needed from the tissue, and the next morning I started cutting out my first shirt. But I happened to encounter a slight issue.
Okay, we're back. This is Puddle, by the way.
Your new queen.
She's the newest addition to the family.
Unhand me.
And is grumpy that I'm stopping her getting into nonsense in the sewing room.
Release me. I will have freedom.
No, you can't. You're not. No, not allowed on tables. There's the rules.
Heck the rules.
I know, you hate it.
I do. F this. I'm leaving.
Oh my god, she's left of her own accord. Amazing. Anyway, I've been figuring some things out, and I decided for the sake of speed and ease to make both of the tops that I want to make out of the same basic pattern. When I was originally looking at the pattern, the way the illustrations were drawn made me think that there was a yoke piece. There is not. So the way this is designed is that it has essentially a faux yoke. The top of this shoulder connects to this after it's been gathered and creates the look of a yoke on the front of the body, which means the arm's eye is tiny, or at least too tiny for me. What I've done to deal with that is create a yoke piece that will be 3 inches wide when it is finished. So hopefully that will add enough space to the arm's eye. The trouble with that is it means I also needed to add 3 inches to the sleeve pattern and 6 inches to the collar, which I got wrong initially because I didn't think about there being 2 shoulders that the collar was attached to. So I only added 3 inches and then had to collar fogle the additional space.
So after cutting out the rest of my pieces, I ran gathering threads on the top and bottom of the upper bodice pieces, did my darts in the blouse back, pinned the front shoulder to the back shoulder, pulled the gathering threads, stroked the gathers into the neatest arrangement I could, and sewed the shoulder seams. Then I started stitching my facing pieces together.
Turns out I did the neck facings wrong, so I'm adding some extra bits.
I ripped apart and reattached all my facing pieces, stitched and understitched the outer curve of the collar, pinned the collar to the neckline, sandwiching it by pinning the facing pieces in place over top of it and stitching around the front facing and the entire neckline. Then I gathered the upper bodice piece to the lower bodice piece, sandwiched it between the outer fabric and lining, pinned all of that to keep it in place, and sewed that as well. I took some little ties I'd made and sandwiched those between the front and back pieces, before taking on the side seams and hemming/closing the bottom edge, which I did by hand. Then I pinned my sleeves into the arm's eye and set the sleeves in. I finished those seams off by zigzag stitching over the raw edges, and Puddle decided to keep me company.
What is? But what is? Want to know what is? Let me investigate. Oh please?
She also did her best to help.
Attack. I will destroy. Thread is my nemesis. Why you not let me do attack? So mean. I will get you. I'm the embodiment of all your nightmares. So many bits that do a move. Looks like witchcraft. Have decided, it is betrayal.
So hello, I'm back and steeling myself for the reality of the situation around the second top I wanted to make. Do I want to make it? Absolutely. Do I have time to figure out how to adapt this pattern to turn it into a wrap top? Probably not. Do my damnedest to get this thing done. So let's just go into some frantic sewing, shall we? It's time.
Because the sleeves I wanted to use were far too big for the amount of fabric I had, but I still wanted my big poofy sleeves, I traced the arm's eye of the sleeve pattern I wanted to use, so I could cut my own version. I folded my fabric into quarters, pinned the partial pattern piece to that fabric, used my flexicurve to plot out the shape I wanted to cut, used pins to mark it out, and cut along that outline I'd created. Then I turned my attention to the back piece. Because my desire for poofy sleeves was all-consuming, I wasn't left with any pieces of fabric large enough for the entire back piece to be cut on a fold. So I decided to fold the bottom of the pattern up to shorten the back and leave the shoulder edge of the pattern hanging off the fabric, because I planned on cutting a piece out of the scraps of the grey fabric to be a shoulder yoke for this blouse. I used my French curve to mark out a new shape for the upper bodice piece so there would be some overlap when the top was wrapped, and then made sure the bottom edge of my improvised section was the correct shape. Now, the first step in the standard construction of this blouse are the shoulder seams, and to do those I needed my yoke piece in place. So I marked a line across the yellow back piece to use as a guide for the yoke, pinned the yoke piece in place, stitched it to secure it down, then pressed it upward and top stitched parallel to the seam I'd just made. I then ran all my gathering stitches and gathered and seamed the shoulders before trimming and tucking under the raw edges and finishing those seams. Because there were going to be cut bias edges on each side of the front bodice, I really wanted to make sure they didn't stretch out, so instead of adding facings, as I was meant to with this pattern, I cut long, straight grain strips of the grey fabric to join together and use as binding along the edge of the neck. I'd done the sensible thing and actually stay-stitched that bias edge to stop it from stretching out of shape, and I pinned my binding to the neck edge before sewing along the whole length of it, trimming the seam allowance, turning over the binding to the inside of the blouse, and top stitching it to catch and secure the underside at the same time. I attached each of my 2 top bodice pieces to one of the sets of lower bodice outers and linings I'd cut, before cutting and joining strips of each fabric I'd cut out to be the ties for the wrap shirt, with the help of some encouraging cuddles from Puddle, of course. I used one of the fabrics for each side of the ties, applying fusible interfacing to one of them and sewing them into a long tube that I turned right side out and pressed before fixing each of them to one of the lower bodice pieces I'd made. I'd made a band of fabric to take the place of that bit of the back bodice I hadn't cut out, so I embedded that band in the lower bodice side seams, did my main side seams, attaching the upper body and back piece, and then started tackling the sleeves. After sewing the inner arm seam on each sleeve, I pinned the bottom of the sleeve in pleats to the sleeve cuff I'd created, painstakingly and with great concentration stitched that seam, then trimmed the seam allowance, folded the cuff to the inside, pinned it, and hand sewed it shut. But I thought it would be easier to finish the bottom edges of the front bodice before the sleeves were attached, so I pressed the bottom edges of the front bodice neatly into place, and stitched as close to that edge as I could to close it. I pinned and sewed in both of my sleeves, again with the support of my kitten helper. Then, when sorting through my textile supplies, an interesting possibility presented itself.
Hey, Emily. You know what is a great idea? Risking the hours and hours you put into making these garments to maybe make them a little bit more of a color you will wear. It's the best idea, isn't it? You should do it. I think you should do it. Do the thing. You will regret it if you don't. So do it. Do it. Just do it. The internet will be so impressed. Your cats will begin to respect your authority. It will fix all your problems, and it will only maybe ruin all your work. Why not do it? Do it. Now. You should do it now. Don't think, just do. You know you want to. Do it. Do it. You want to do it. Go.
So I dyed 'em and dried 'em. And with that, all 4 pieces were done.
there you go, they are finally done. This whole project took much longer than I care to admit, which I'm sure you're unsurprised by based on me talking about the hottest day in history in the UK, which happened in July, and this video finally surfacing at the end of summer. But hey ho, it happens. Pretty happy with how they turned out in terms of the way they're shaped and the overall style of them. I think they're super cute. The dyeing. So when you dye fabric, one, it's very important to know what fibre your fabric is made of so that you know how it will react to the dye. I believe this to be cotton, completely cotton. It is most definitely a cotton polyester blend based on how it reacted to the fabric dye and how pale the colour came out on it. That's fine, I'm at peace with that. The other thing is, it's kind of important to know that most fabric dyes that are easily available, salt dyes, will react differently and kind of stick to with greater vigour anywhere that like sweat or similar has soaked into the fabric. And when I decided to dye them, I mean, let's be honest, I didn't think through it carefully, did I? But when I decided to do it, I was thinking about it in terms of dyeing garments I had just created. I wasn't thinking about it in terms of the origin of the fabric I had used to make these garments, in that they were literally bed sheets, which means they were never going to dye as nicely or evenly as shiny, new, unused, unworn fabric would. And I knew the risks, and I did it anyway. And as a result, there are far brighter purple, blue stains in all sorts of unfortunate places, including the crotch of the trousers, the back of the culottes, just at the side of the chest of one of the shirts. But it is what it is. I'm still happy with them, I still like them. Have I learned my lesson? No, because I'm probably going to over-dye these to make them more green, but there you go. I hope you enjoyed this little adventure into upcycling and remaking. If you wanted to keep hanging out, that would be really cool, but whether you decide to keep hanging out or not, hope everything's okay in your world, and I'll see you all next time. Puddle says goodbye too, by the way.
Do not speak for me. Don't lie. I do not say goodbye.
Is it possible for me to stand in front of that? I could make you different, could I? This, those, that, maybe? Who knows? What? Do you want attention? Is that what is happening? Come here then. Well, come here. I can't get you over there. Come be lap baby. Small kitten cameo for you.